This is Vince McKee.
And Eli Mooneyham.
And you're listening to the Key on Sports Podcast. Our guest today will be Chris Leben. Put your feet up, grab something cold to drink, sit back and enjoy. Up next, Chris the Crippler Leben. All right, welcome back here with the Key on Sports Podcast. I am Vince McKee, sitting aside. With me is Eli Mooneyham. We want to welcome in our guest, Chris Leben. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Now, growing up in growing up in Portland, who were some of the fighters you looked up to and got you interested in the sport? Because you kind of grew up during a very unique time where really the sport was just beginning.
You know, it really was, and I was already into those early UFCs. The very first ones were when I was in middle school, and I remember watching those with my friends and, you know, talking about how that's something I wanted to do. And then I got into high school, started wrestling. Then one day I got a call, and my brother says, "Hey, man, I got a job at this car lot, and Randy Couture and Matt Lindland are kicking the shit out of each other in the garage." And at that time, Randy Couture was the heavyweight world champion, you know, and I was like, "What? I'm on my way," you know, and that was Team Quest in the very, very beginning, you know, so I shot down there and immediately, you know, was hooked and was like, "Sign me up," you know, got signed up and then started training immedially after that.
You know, and we're going to talk about that in a second, and we can't wait to dive into all of that. But I mention a very special woman, and that's your mother. You know, raising several children as a single mom, she seems like an incredible woman. How proud of you are of your mom, and how much of an influence was she on you growing up?
Man, I think you must have read somebody else's bio, dude.
Oh. No, I'd read something that said you were raised by a single mom, so my fault there.
Raised by a single mom that, you know, more or less a meth head, you know, in a tweaker house. She really wasn't there for me much growing up. You know, I mean, she had her own struggles, don't get me wrong. She still does. She has her own battles, and you know, with age, I've come to realize that, you know, she was suffering more than us. You know, but my childhood was rough because of that.
Oh, I understand. My apology. Here's Eli.
Hey, Chris, Eli Mooneyham here.
Eli, what up, man?
Hey, nothing much, man. I had to ask you. You turned pro in 2002, and you went on an absolute tear, honestly, to start that show. To start off with your career, you won You won your first 10 out of your 11 fights, and including the WEC Middleweight Championship. 8 of the 10 wins came by way of KO or submission. What were you doing, Chris? What let you get that hot start?
You know, I think I was just too dumb to know any better. I mean, when I would just, you know, just blind faith that I was going to win. You know, and I had a couple fights. You know, there was one where I fought a guy named Otto Olsen, and he kicked the crap out of me, ended up choking me unconscious. But, you know, I passed out, had a dream in the middle of the fight, somehow woke up and still knocked him out. I mean, there were several fights of those first, you know, 10 pro fights that I should have lost. But just being young and refusing to lose and just thinking that, you know, it was divine that I win, you know, that I was on a mission from God or something along those lines. I think it just, you know, I somehow would always manage to pull it off. You know, I wouldn't attribute it to any sort of skill, any sort of high skill level or anything like that. I mean, definitely toughness, you know, but I was still figuring a lot of stuff out as far as, you know, my style and my game went. You know, I just refused to lose.
We definitely saw that early on, Chris, and at 10-1 you could have entered the UFC traditionally, but you decided to join Nate Quarry on the inaugural season, your teammate of The Ultimate Fighter. Why did you go with The Ultimate Fighter, and can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, actually, you know, because I was at, you know, like that little bit of story I told a second ago, you know, I was at Team Quest, you know, and my coach was Randy Couture, you know, and Randy said, "Hey, there's going to be this show, you know, I want you to send in a video." So I sent in a video to apply for the Ultimate Fighter, and ultimately that first season, everybody that got on the show were guys that were already knocking on the door of the UFC. Mike Swick and I had just fought for the WEC title, like you said, and both of us were on the show, along with everybody else that was close to making that break into the UFC. So went with Nate and I both got on that first season, and ultimately it rushed in a new era as far as mixed martial arts is concerned. We had no idea the effect that show was going to bring, but all of a sudden I went from, being just some fighter that nobody knew to being more or less a household name. I mean, the fame that came along with that show and being on regular national TV was just incredible. I don't think any of us could have possibly guessed or comprehended the ripple effect that was going to have on mixed martial arts and American culture, in a whole. So ultimately, I probably could have just went to the UFC, but I'm glad I did the show because I think the show really allows people to, fans to get to know the fighters and really get behind the fighters, get to understand their personality, and they kind of relate with you better. And I think that ultimately helped me through my career.
And Chris, I got to follow up with this one. How was the house the first time the first reaction when you watched the show is everybody's so in awe of the house. I just want to know, what was your first reaction when you saw the house?
Well, man, like I was saying, bro, I grew up in ghetto, I grew up in, my bedroom, the wall was falling off the back of my house and snow was blowing in. Most of the time we didn't have power or running water a lot of the time in my house. So yeah, man, it was something beyond what I had ever seen at that time. I thought it was amazing then. Now, looking back, I mean, it was a nice house. It was a nice house. It wasn't, like a Scarface mansion. You know what I mean? But it was a nice, legit house. But at the moment, I thought it was the most incredible thing ever.
Chris, I myself watching it at the time as a fan before I became a journalist into this industry. You were a favorite of mine from that show, just, watching your journey into the show and everything that went on. So I wanted to ask you this question because I've talked with Gray Maynard, who appeared on the Ultimate Fighter a few years later, and some other guys as well. I just want to know, do you feel like they portrayed you in an accurate light? And was there a legitimate beef between you and Josh Koscheck, or was a lot of that they were just producers trying to produce something for TV?
Well, so here's the thing. If you film somebody 24 hours a day to make a 40-minute video per week, you can portray them however the fuck you want to portray them. You want to make them look like Gandhi, you can do that. You want to make them look like the biggest dirtbag on the planet, you can do that. And ultimately, you said it, producers. What do you need producers for on reality TV? So there's absolutely, a planned character arc that they plan into those kind of shows, that they wanted to show growth and whatnot in my character. I understand that. That's how TV works. But ultimately, I would say, yeah, in a lot of ways, I was that asshole that they portrayed. But they did, as far as training and being a good training partner, I've always been a great training partner, and everybody's always surprised when they work with me, like, wow, he really helped me out, So, I mean, they portrayed me, it wasn't false the way they portrayed me. Everything that they showed, I did, but they portrayed me in the manner that they wanted to portray me in.
Another unique thing, and I feel, my good friend is Mike Goldberg, and me and Goldie have talked about this a lot over the years. We feel like that initial cast of The Ultimate Fighter was the greatest of all time, and I'm going to give some of our fans at home, just a little roster. A few names on that was Josh Koscheck, Diego Sanchez, Kenny Kenflo Florian, Nate The Rock Corey, Stefan Bonner, and Forrest Griffin, just to name a few, along with yourself. I mean, would you, looking back on it, 2020, would you really say, like, hey, that might have been the greatest assembly of MMA talent under one roof?
Yeah, I mean, well, aspiring MMA talent at the time. I mean, we hadn't achieved what we were going to go on to achieve. And again, I think that had to do with the fact that it was the first season, and, they had they selected from guys that were already knocking on the door of the UFC. Then you get down, once you start getting towards season 10, and they're, and they're doing two shows a year with 20 plus guys on each season. You're looking at 40 guys a year. There's not that many people,
True.
that are at that skill level. So you started to see the median skill. I mean, don't get me wrong. You had your standouts, for sure. You had your Bisbings, you had your Kendall Groves, Ed Herman, all these guys that ultimately went on to have great UFC careers, but nothing like that first season.
Coming out of the show, you had a lot of momentum. People knew who you were now, national level. You come out on an absolute tear. And it's funny because I saw your tweet the other day, and I already had this question ready to ask you, so it works out perfectly. You come off that show, you win 5 straight fights, improving your overall record to 15-1. Do you feel, looking back on it now, do you feel that had the UFC not signed Anderson Silva, the shot at Rich Franklin's middleweight championship would have been yours without even having to have that fight with Silva?
Yeah, I mean, before I fought Silva, Dana came up to my room. He calls me up. He says, "Hey, man, I got a gift for you. I'm gonna come up to your room and bring it to you." And I'm thinking, "Fuck yeah, right. Dana's bringing me a gift, so Rolex, something."
How you doing? Great.
No, man. Dana shows up to my room and he's got a fucking belt buckle he got from American Outfitters that says, what did it say? Fighter by day, drunker by night, drunker by choice, like some cheesy belt buckle. He gives me the cheesy. He said, "I saw this, I was thinking of you." He gives me the $12 belt buckle, and then he says, "If you beat Anderson tomorrow, I want you to call out Rich Franklin, So, I mean, that's how close I was, I mean, if, things would have been different, maybe there would have been one more fight. Whoever I would have fought, it wouldn't have been fucking Anderson Silva. You know what I mean? So I would have had better odds.
Yep.
And that fight against Anderson, I don't think the UFC knew what I was in for. I knew what I was in for. I ended up getting, I think Sherdog gave me worst quote of the year for saying I was going to beat up Anderson Silva and send him back to Japan. And it's like, well, fuck, what do you say? I think I might lose to this guy? Is that what you say before a fight?
Yeah, very true.
My coach at the time, Matt Hume, was the head judge for Pride and was very familiar and watched all the cage rages and everything. And we knew Anderson's backstory, who he was, and everything that had gone on with him very well. That's the only fight ever that he or anybody else has ever recommended that I not take. And I called Joe Silva. I said, "Hey, man, can I get somebody else?" And he's like, "No, you can't." All right, we'll take the fight, But that's the only fight I ever tried to not take was Anderson Silva, because we knew it was going to be that tough. Ultimately, Matt had come up with an excellent game plan for me, which involved not charging forward. But once that bell rang, I did exactly what I normally do, which is I went straight at him. I'm going to knock this guy out. And, that got me, whatever, to 15-1 or whatever, that moving forward and swinging recklessly, just throwing caution to the wind and fighting with reckless abandon. It got me all the way up to Anderson Silva. But when I had that fight, I realized I had to go back to the drawing board. I realized there was more levels to this shit, and that kind of fighting was never going to beat him, So I had to go back and completely revamp my game, and because of that, I ended up losing a couple of my next few fights. Sometimes you got to take 2 steps back to go 1 step forward, And that's what I did. Ultimately, it worked out. I never did get that rematch with Anderson. He ended up continuing on that terror that he was on, arguably the gnarliest run of destruction the UFC has ever seen. I mean, yeah, we've got Khabibs and we've got, this and that, but I think a lot of people don't remember just how feared Anderson Silva was, and just how unstoppable and how quickly he annihilated so many high-level guys. And like I said in my tweet, that was really my only saving grace, was that, right after the fight, people were like, what the heck happened to Leben? But then after the next guy, and then after Steffen, and then after Forrest, and then after, you know what I mean? People started going, oh, it wasn't Leben. It's this guy is special. He's special.
Chris, you mentioned that you got right back into it. Your next fight, you knocked out Jorge Santiago in 2 rounds. Can you just talk about the training camp that went into that after that Silva fight? You talked about you had to get right back to it. Can you talk about, the process to get back into then eventually delivering that knockout in 2 rounds?
Yeah, well, I wanted to get right back on the horse immediately. So as soon as I got home, called Joe Silva, and I was like, hey, man, I need to get back in there. Ultimately, that Jorge Santiago fight was 7 weeks later, So I literally went home and got right back to training in order to just, and then I went out there and I worked extensively on tightening up my striking, tightening up my arms, holding my guard closer, footwork, this sort of thing. And, it worked out in my next fight. It did work out in my next fight. But then the next 2 after that, I was still working on some things, and I had some close fights that I lost. But, that's the thing about fighting. It's constantly a work in progress, I wouldn't necessarily, as a coach now, recommend that somebody come right back in off a loss just to get back on the winning side of things. That was a psychological issue on my part. As a coach now, I always tell my guys, I say, listen, whether we win or lose, we come home and we go, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what needs improvement, and we spend our time and we focus on these things, and then we go out and fight, and the fight is the measuring stick. How did my game plan, how did my skills, how did those work out? How would I assess my performance? And so ultimately, I think, after a loss or even a win, a fighter that wants to consistently get better should spend some time at home in skill development. When you go back and you've only got 7 weeks, you don't really have time to develop any new skills. Basically, you're jumping right back into hard sparring and your A game that you already have.
Yeah, no doubt about it, and that's what I want to talk to you about, because after that stretch, a 3-4 stretch, you went on a 15-day run that diehard UFC fans still talk about today. You knocked out Aaron Simpson on June 19th, 2010, and then turned around and submitted Yoshihiro Akiyama in a 3-round thriller at UFC 116. Chris, I'm telling you right now, my man, I could close my eyes and picture that fight in my head. It was so damn good. I remember it so clearly. On the same card, with Brock Lesnar, I want to say right about this time of year, too. I think it was like July 3rd. Just amazing. Can you talk about that 15-day stretch, defeating Simpson, all of a sudden somebody pulls out and you got to fight Akiyama, and just the thrilling stretch that was?
So Aaron Simpson, I called out Aaron Simpson. I wanted to fight him because Aaron, my best friend, had fought him previously, Ed Herman, and ended up blowing his knee out in the fight. Ed was doing very well, blew his knee out, and, didn't try to throw a high kick with a blown out knee, and it was no good, so, I don't know. I thought maybe I could get some redemption for him or something. We knew it was a tough fight, but the game plan was well. I trained hard for Aaron Simpson. The game plan worked out well. We ended up getting that knockout, I believe, second round. And then went out, celebrated in Vegas that night, flew home, ordered a large pizza, was sitting on my couch eating a large pizza, and that's when I got a call from the UFC, and they're like, hey, we want you to take this fight. And I'm like, you guys are out of your mind. I'm not fighting in 15 days. Like, I just got through a training camp, and then more or less, they wouldn't take no for an answer. They threw me some extra money, and made me a deal that I couldn't refuse. And I was like, all right, dude, yeah, fuck it, let's do it. So Akiyama, the issue is I had no time to prepare for a guy that fights with his style. Also, you can't peak twice. That's why they call it peaking. You have to train your body and your timing, your cardio, your weight. All that has to come to a pinnacle, and you can't hang out there or something gives out. You either get an injury, you get sick. You can't hang out at that optimum level of performance, at all times. So it was a rough 2 weeks. My body was falling apart, trying to get through training camp. Got through the training camp, got to the fight. Ultimately, I thought I fought a little bit sloppier than I did with Aaron Simpson, but it made for a far more exciting fight. People seem to love that fight. People continually remember that fight. A lot of people have forgotten about Aaron Simpson, but everybody remembers the Akiyama battle because we more or less just stood in front of each other and slugged it out. I was probably losing. I'm certain I was losing on the cards before I got that triangle, and I'll tell you a funny story. I was walking after the fight. I remember walking back to the dressing room, and my coach, Bert Richardson, is there, and I said, what was that, about halfway through the second round? And he's like, no, dude, there's 10 seconds left in the third round. What are you talking, or 2 seconds left in the third round? What are you talking about, And I'm like, oh, shit, And then I went back and watched the video, and you could see about halfway through the second round, he hits me with something, and my knees buckle. And from that point on, I don't remember any of the fight. I was just on autopilot.
That's crazy. Let me ask a quick follow-up question to that. Also on that card was Brock Lesnar. Do you ever consider things like that, of who else is on the card, who's headlining, before you take a fight, only because there's probably going to be more eyes on the product?
No. Never. It's never mattered to me. All I care about is my opponent and my career. What's going to move my career forward? That's always been my main thought. Ultimately, just like the fights now, how there's no crowd, no audience in the crowd. I've told people continuously, they could hang a black curtain around that cage when I'm fighting I would fight exactly the same. There's a guy in there trying to tear my head off. And when I'm in training camp, that's who I'm preparing for. And when it comes fight week, that's who I'm thinking about. And when I get in there with in the cage, that's who I'm going to get in with, and that's who I'm fighting. Everything else is irrelevant in my mind.
And that's how winning's done. I've said that for a long time, to people. Just focus on staying in your lane and worrying about what you can control. That's a great philosophy.
You've only got so much energy to give. You might as well give it all to what you can affect.
Yeah, I agree completely. Now, your last big career win came against an MMA legend in Wanderlei Silva. Not only did you beat a legend, but you did it in 27 seconds. How'd you do it, and how good did it feel?
It felt great because the reason I took the Akiyama fight was because he was slated to fight Wanderlei Silva. They brought him over for Pride. They had already, him and Wanderlei had previous beef, and they were going to fight each other. Wanderlei got hurt. I stepped in for Wanderlei to fight Akiyama. So as soon as that fight was over, I started lobbying to fight Wanderlei Silva. And I remember Dana telling me, dude, you're crazy, at first. And then finally he called me back, and he's like, all right, man, you wanted it. Be careful what you ask for. We're gonna give you Wanderlei, and ultimately that's one of the few fights that I really didn't think I was gonna win. I more or less thought I was gonna lose that fight, but that's not what mattered to me. What mattered is, Wanderlei was one of the people I grew up watching. I used to walk across town there used to be this old Japanese toy store in Old Town, Portland, and he would rent me these bootleg Prides that he videotaped off Sky Perfect TV over in Japan. And that's how I became a Wanderlei fan, was watching, his old battles with Sakuraba and everybody in Pride, when I was just, an amateur or even before my career, so I asked for that fight because I wanted to fight, one of my heroes. And, ultimately, hey, man, it worked out good for me, If we fought 10 more times, would it work out that way? I don't know. But, that on that given Saturday, the cards fell in my favor, and, that's history now.
Chris, in 2013, you ended up walking away from active competition in UFC. I have a trifold question. How hard was that decision to make? Why did you decide to walk away? And what do you miss the most about active competition, fighting in MMA?
Okay, so when I retired from the UFC, I had lost my last 3 fights. There was a lot of 4. I lost my 4th fight, and there was a lot of damage going on in my life, both outside of the cage. Alcohol, drug abuse was a problem, and ultimately, I for a guy that fancied himself that would fight till the death, I ultimately finished my career on the stool. And what I mean by that is, I didn't, in the UFC, my last fight, I didn't get up to answer that 3rd round bell, just because my heart wasn't in it at that point, and that crushed me. That was a devastating blow. However, ultimately, I was able to find, AA, get sober, cut out the drugs, change my life around completely. At which point I signed a contract with Bellator, and they told me that I went and did my pre-fight medicals, and they said, well, your heart is failing, you have a ejection fraction of 14%, and then quit the drinking, changed my life, went back to the doctor. She says, you don't need a new heart, luckily now, but we need to put this pacemaker in, and I was like, well, hey, can I do jiu-jitsu if you put in that pacemaker? She's like, no, you can't. But if you don't do it, you have this % chance that you're going to die this year, So I went back and I talked to my support group, ultimately decided not to get it, continued to go back to the cardiologist, and she kept going, well, it's just a miracle. I don't know what's going on, but your heart is just getting better and better. Most people's would plateau. Yours is continuing to get better. And I said, well, would you let me fight? And she said, yeah, I mean, you're at the low range normally. You're healthy, and I would sign off on you fighting. And then that is when ultimately I got a call from the bare knuckle boxing organization, and so in bare knuckle boxing I had three fights. My first fight was against Phil Baroni, 1st round knockout. My second fight was another 1st round knockout, and my 3rd fight was a 5-round war. I ended up with 36 stitches in my face, broken orbital. They had to stitch my nose back on. But I was sober, and I didn't finish my combat sports career on the stool. That's the most important one, is that 3rd fight to me. And so that's why about 2 weeks ago, I went ahead and officially retired from that, because, I feel like, I was able to validate, is that the right word, myself, and show people the kind of fighter that I am, who I really am, not that you can ever change the past or what happened with the UFC, but, to be able to go out there and have those 3 fights and then, finish with a war where I had every reason to quit and I didn't, it was a victorious way of finishing my martial arts career. So as of now I'm officially retired, and time to move on to bigger and better things. But yeah, that's what happened.
Chris, you mentioned your journey with alcohol, and I had to ask you, what encouraging words would you have for anyone battling substance abuse at this moment?
You know what, man? You're not alone. It may feel like you're alone and you're by yourself, but you're not. There's a lot of people that have been through it and have probably been deeper and darker than where you are right now. And there is a light that you can get out, you can escape, you can break free. It's going to take some work, though. It's not going to be easy. So if you're willing, if you have the desire and you're willing, you anybody can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. You're going to need to, go out, seek out rehab, seek out treatment, seek out other like-minded individuals, surround yourself with the different friends, find a support group, go to meetings, get on Zoom, go to meetings. You've got to do things. It's not just going to happen by itself. You've got to do things to make it happen, but it can and it will happen if you put your mind to it.
Last question for you today, and thank you again for joining us here with Keon Sports. Very much appreciated for your time, and we don't want to take up any more of your time, so this will be our last question today. You have a knowledge of the sport. You've been around it for a long time. You seem to truly know what it takes to win, what it takes to get ready for a fight, and what it takes to compete. Now that your in-cage career's done, the bare knuckles done, would you ever consider a long-term career in either commentating or refereeing?
I am a referee.
Correct. And here's the thing, though. Would you consider, just doing that for the rest of the time, or do you feel like you're going to go back, at some point and try to fight again, or you just feel like refereeing, possibly even commentating down the road, is your final path?
No, that's the plan. The plan for me is to referee. I've been a referee out here in California for about 3 years. Right now I work for CAMO, the California Amateur Martial Arts Organization. Ultimately, I need to work for CSAC, California State Athletic Commission. They're the ones that do the UFC and Bellator and the pro fights. So, that's one of the reasons I wanted to retire from competition, because I do believe that fighting and refereeing at the same time is at some level a conflict of interest. Ultimately, I love this sport, and I've dedicated my life to it, and I want to give back as much as I can. I love the challenge of being a ref. It's far more difficult, far harder than I ever thought going into it as a job, as a career. But ultimately it's super rewarding. It keeps me in the loop. It keeps me attached, keeps me around other fighters and athletes and martial artists, the kind of people that I love to surround myself with already, so absolutely my goal is, now is to focus on my coaching, and then also focus on my career as a referee.
Well, Chris, it's been our honor and our pleasure to speak with you today. We're going to go ahead and put the recorder on pause for a brief moment. Thank you again. 1 second. Well, that will do it for today. Our interview with Chris Leben up right now. If you want to go ahead and scroll through all our different podcasts. Been a couple of very big weeks here on Keon Sports. I don't normally have a co-host. I do today with Eli Moonenham, so I'm going to actually toss this to Eli for a quick minute and just ask him, how impressed were you by Chris Leben? I mean, he came across very articulate, very intelligent, and probably one of the better interviews we've ever done. What do you think?
I think it was a really fun interview, Vince. I think it was really telling. I think would be the right word to use. Well, not that it wasn't fun. It was really fun, but it was fun and it was telling. Is where I'm at. That's what I gathered from it. He had some really cool stories about the house, the Ultimate Fighter house, and had different stories about his fights, and talking about just getting in the ring with, or the octagon rather, with Anderson Silva, and I was really intrigued by the whole interview, just listening and hearing his insight. He has a lot of insight on the sport and knowledge and understanding, and sometimes you don't hear that from everybody, where they know where they're at and where the sport's at. Chris had a really good understanding of everything going on, and he's obviously got a great journey going on. I mean, he just seems like a stand-up dude. I think he was a lot of fun today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As a journalist, you get the chance nowadays, especially us with Keon Sports, with all the vintage stuff we do, to talk and interview guys that you watched growing up or, as a fan. And when you could cross over from fan to journalist and bring both those angles into an interview and the guy comes across as well as Chris did today, it really is a pleasure. There's nothing worse than when you meet somebody for the first time or talk to somebody for the first time that you watched on TV as a kid or even a young adult and really looked up to, and then they turn out to be a jerk. I mean, that's a terrible feeling, and I've been through that a few times. So to have, Chris come across as well as he did, and I got to see all of our MMA interviews have done that. They've been tremendous. So before we send everybody home today, just wanted to encourage everybody, when you're done listening to this here in a few seconds, go back on that podcast page, and if you're a fan of WWF, ECW, and MMA, we have a ton of great stuff for you here. Q&A with Pat Tanaka, and these are all podcasts. Pat Tanaka, Al Snow, the legend that is Nikita Koloff. Guys, I would very much encourage you to listen to all of those. Ricky Morton.
Can't forget about the Rock and Roll Express, man.
Yeah, I mean, Rock and Roll Express is unbelievable popular. Another MMA fighter here, John Fitch. We got Sean the Muscle Shark Shirk. Tom Pritchard, who talks a lot about Kane and the wrestling school they got out there. Hector Guerrero, obviously a member of the famous Guerrero family. Clearly the podcast that has absolutely gone viral. I cannot say enough, over 250,000 hits already for the legend that is Terry Runnels. Obviously what you said about Brock Lesnar had a little bit to do with that, to say the least. Podcast with Scott Hudson, the WCW announcer. Local guy here, man. St. Edward's graduate, Gray Maynard.
Yeah.
And just a host of more, and even football players as well with Brian Hansen, professional hockey player Blake Bolden. So we have really been blowing up lately. I want to thank everybody for listening, and hopefully talk to everybody soon. And if you want to be a sponsor, email me, coachvin14@yahoo.com. If you're an agent or a trainer of any MMA fighter or WWE legend and you want them to come on the show, email me. We'll set it up, coachvin14@yahoo.com. For Eli Mooningham, I am Vince McKee. Everybody have a safe, happy, healthy, fun 4th of July weekend. Happy birthday, America.